just the name, I mean, Custer's Last Stand, it rings different than, he attacked a large village that he didn't quite understand or appreciate the size. He didn't know what was going to happen. He was caught by surprise. He retreated to the only ground he could find. There was really no place to go, and then he was slaughtered where he stood.
As I march through the valley of the blood, sweat, and tears, look, God the only man that I fear. This ain't nothing new. We've been doing this for years.
George Custer was a man whose reckless independence and defiance of authority led him to both extraordinary achievements and, of course, catastrophic failure.
Crazy Horse was himself to the very, very end. And he said, this is the way that I've lived. This is the way that my dad lived. This is the way that my grandpa lived. And if you come and try to take it from me, I will fight you. And I'm not going to do it any other way. He refused to leave. He said, I'm not leaving. I'm from here. I'm from this land. I'm not leaving. I'm not going into Canada. When he found out he was going to get arrested, he said, I'm not getting arrested. And then even as he was dying, he said, I'm not even going to lay on your bed. And you're not going to take a photo of me. I was excited for this one. I got pretty into the Battle of Little Bighorn, not going to lie.
This is the story of two men who died as they lived, violently. They were both war lovers, men of aggression with a deeply rooted instinct to charge the enemy, rout him, and kill him. Men of supreme courage, they were natural-born leaders in a combat crisis, the type to whom others instinctively looked for guidance and inspiration. They were always the first to charge the enemy, and the last to retreat.
He went to West Point in 1861 and graduated last in his class.
Whoa.
You know who graduated first from West Point in 1861?
Crazy Horse.
No, I don't know either. But yeah, while he was there, he just goofed off a lot. He got a ton of demerits. Guess how many demerits he got? So it's 4 years. He was there for 4 years.
Oh boy.
How many demerits do you think someone who got last in their class could rack up over 4 years?
Must be a lot. I'll say 50.
50?
Yeah.
No, 726.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's one of the worst conduct records in the history of the Academy.
They survived, didn't get kicked out.
One thing is 1861, that year is the start of the Civil War, so that's when he graduated. So I think they actually cut it short, like let the last year out. I think it was supposed to be 5 years from what I saw, but they cut it short so that those people could get out and get into the war. But the local minister around West Point, he was talking about Custer. He said he was the instigator of devilish plots both during the service and in Sunday school. On the surface, he appeared attentive and respectful, but underneath, the mind boiled with disruptive ideas. So that's kind of Custer's brief background. And then, like I said, 1861. So he's going to get out of West Point and go right into the Civil War. So I'll kind of pause him there and hop and do Crazy Horse for a minute.
The warrior known as Crazy Horse was a legendary Lakota Sioux leader, but his life is shrouded in mystery. There's no known photographs of him, and his birth year is still uncertain. But his story is obviously a fascinating one. His refusal to conform left an undeniable mark on history.
No one knows when he was born, but they think sometime between 1840 to 1845, so kind of right around the same age as Custer. There's different accounts, like his dad says that, based on whatever they're able to track back, it's like some accounts were 1842, some were 1840. So it just all varied. So no one actually knows, but Crazy Horse was paler in complexion than a lot of the other Sioux, and he had kind of light, long hair. His name originally, they didn't give young boys names until they became men, I guess, and earned their permanent name. So his dad was actually named Crazy Horse, and his name was Among the Trees, but usually he was called Curly or Light Hair. There's no known photo of Crazy Horse. He kind of famously refused to have his photo taken.
Okay.
I don't know. I saw one that said there's a photo or maybe two photos that you can find that they think may be him, but from what I saw, all the sources say that he refused to have his photo taken, so there's no known photograph. So no one really knows for sure what he looks like. I mean, they're making that monument, the Crazy
Yeah,
Horse
it's
Memorial.
taken forever. Yeah.
Yeah, taken forever to do, and they're doing it on like one of the famous Native Americans that no one knows what he looks like.
Looks like. Yeah.
For sure. So just
maybe
kind
that's
of
why it's taken so long.
Yeah, they're trying to decide, trying to dig up something. But
so is he in the Dakotas then? Where is he growing up at?
Yeah, he's kind of up in that area, like the Black Hills area, the Dakotas, Montana. But yeah, so he was a Lakota Sioux. After a battle with the Arapahoes in 1858, he was then given his father's name, and his dad took the name Worm, actually not to be confused with Dennis Rodman. So Crazy Horse, he goes out on a vision quest at some point in his youth.
Crazy Horse's vision quest was a defining moment in his youth, and it really shaped his identity and his strategy as a warrior. And this vision led to his unique appearance and apparently near invincibility in battle.
I didn't find too much on this, but it said he ignored the traditional and required rituals of a vision quest, just went out by himself. What they would do is go out and just no food or water for however long until they saw a vision came to him. And Crazy Horse, the vision that he had was of a warrior who wore very simple clothing, no war bonnet, no face paint. Hair was just down. He had one feather sticking out of his hair and one stone behind his ear. The warrior was running around with bullets and arrows flying around, but he was never hit. And the people would grab the warrior trying to hold him back, but he broke free and got struck by lightning in the vision still, leaving a lightning mark on his cheek and hailstone marks on his body. And so Crazy Horse interpreted that to say, if I dress in that way, I don't dress flashy, I'll never be wounded in battle. But he did. He never wore a war bonnet or face paint. I think I saw something about he maybe put the lightning mark on his cheek that the warrior had, and then he never was injured in battle or anything like that. Except for, I think, one time, I didn't write this down, but one time he was not supposed to take scalps. Like, he wasn't in the vision. The warrior never took anything for himself. And he did get hit one time after he took a scalp in battle or something along those lines. So he took that vision, that kind of directed how he would dress and act.
So Crazy Horse and Custer are these two iconic figures, but they had two very different philosophies when it came to how they would dress and the appearance they wanted to put forth.
So you got, kind of the opposite of Custer, very in a world in which a lot of the people would really paint themselves and kind of go above and beyond to make themselves appear intimidating in battle. He did the opposite and dressed down. And Custer very much lived in a world where it wasn't. There were people who did dress that way, but a lot of people, especially in the Civil War, just wore what they wore. So in the book, Black Elk Speaks, pretty famous book. Black Elk was a Sioux, and he was around for the Battle of Little Bighorn. If memory serves, it's been a couple of years, but he says this about Crazy Horse. This is not Black Elk, but it's the author. He says, he was a queer man and would go about the village without noticing people or saying anything. In his own teepee, he would joke, and when he was on the warpath with a small party, he would joke to make his warriors feel good. But around the village, he hardly ever noticed anybody except little children. All the Lakotas liked to dance and sing, but he never joined a dance, and they say nobody ever heard him sing. but everyone liked him, and they would do anything he wanted or go anywhere he said. Pop back to Custer now. I don't know what the best way to do these two characters is. I'm trying to keep them side by side like that.
So despite Custer's problematic beginnings at West Point, once he gets into the Civil War, he really quickly gains a reputation and makes a name for himself through his fearlessness.
Sheridan told Libby, his wife, Libby Custer, that there is scarcely an individual in our service who has contributed more to bring about this desirable result than your gallant husband. So by the end of the Civil War, he had achieved the rank of Major General. So yeah, Custer graduated 1861. He served in the cavalry for the United States. So yeah, when you look at Custer, he's a guy who very aware of his image. He dressed in a way that would make people say, "Look at me." He was a cavalry commander, so he was always wanted to be ahead of his men, and so they could see, like, there's Custer leading us into battle or whatever, and he wanted to stand out, and he took measures to do that. And he kind of started achieving a name for himself because, like I said, he graduated last, so he's not someone who has a bunch of automatic honor to his name or whatever. That he wouldn't be someone who came in with a reputation, I guess is the way of, like, oh, we expect big things out of this guy. But he did start to achieve a name for himself by his daring charges. He was seized the first Confederate battle flag of the war, and then at one point they were down in the peninsula trying to cross the Chickahominy River, and there's all these generals or whatever higher ups are sitting there kind of debating on where they should cross and this and that. And Custer just rode out in the middle of the river to determine if it was passable or not, which people kind of talked about, earned him some notoriety. He ended up becoming an aide to this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Pleasanton. They struck up a pretty good relationship. Custer said about Pleasanton, "I do not believe a father could love a son more than General Pleasanton loves me." Whether that's true or not, who knows? But
so now we're arriving at probably one of the most pivotal moments in Custer's career. He's going to be promoted to Brigadier General at only 23 years old, and then just 2 days later, he's thrust into Gettysburg, and he directly affects the outcome of one of the most critical points in the Civil War.
Like I said, he's a cavalry officer for the United States, and right around the time he worked under Pleasanton for a bit. In 1863, the Union in the East, they've had a number of different commanders. They had McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, and the Army of Northern Virginia is invading the North now. I mean, they went up briefly, just real briefly, like they crossed the river and fought in Maryland at Antietam. I think 1862 maybe. But this time they get all the way up to Pennsylvania. And a guy by the name of George Gordon Meade is going to take over command of the Army of the Potomac. And this is an army who 2 years into the war, they haven't won a single battle on the battlefield. And now Robert E. Lee and his guys are up north of Washington, D.C. So pretty critical juncture in the Civil War. So Meade takes over command, and he started replacing, like, up to this point, there's a lot of political generals, married some senator's sister or something like that, and so they get a spot in the Army, and that's kind of how it worked at the beginning, because they didn't have what they had way smaller than what they need. So a lot of these guys got political or just kind of friendship appointments. So Meade gets in, and he's starting to replace some of those guys with generals who he thought would be ready to fight. So he promotes Pleasanton, who then promoted Custer, because he thought Custer would be someone who would be prone to being aggressive, which he was. So June 29th, 1863, he gets promoted to Brigadier General. 2 days later, the Battle of Gettysburg is going to start. So he's been Brigadier General for 2 days, and then he's going to go into the largest, bloodiest battle in American history.
Wow. And
23 years old at the time.
I was going to say, he's young.
Yeah, one of the young. I don't think he was the youngest, but one of the youngest for sure. That's like an honor that you've got to have seen some things to get typically.
So Custer would lead the Michigan cavalry to some pivotal victories at Gettysburg. And along the way, his boldness and flamboyance really cemented his image and reputation as this fearless and very notable leader in the Civil War.
So he's commanding the Michigan Cavalry Brigade, nicknamed the Wolverines, if you can imagine that. But yeah, about his uniform, like you were saying, he wore a velvet uniform with like coils of gold lace, had spurs, this red scarf around his neck, and this large, big, like sombrero hat. Evidently he had these, like we talked about, his hair, these blonde, kind of long, curly-ish locks, and he would lather them down in cinnamon oil. I don't know what just to make it smell bad. I don't know what that was for, but just something he did. So, but you would think, and if it was me, I wouldn't have anything that would make me stand out to somebody who was shooting at me whatsoever.
Right.
Not Custer. And some of the other cavalry commanders, like Jeb Stuart on the Confederate side, he was kind of flashy in his appearance too. So it's not as if he's the only. I mean, there are some people who Stuart wore a big like ostrich feather in his hat, and so some people did do that, and it was particularly seemed to be, anyways, these cavalry commanders, the guys on cavalry or the guys on horseback who often are riding around trying to gather information about the enemy position and movements and things, and so they're, I guess, more prone to being a little bit flashy maybe. But he's going to play a big role at Gettysburg, both of them actually. Stuart was the guy he's the cavalry commander of the Confederate Army, so they're up in enemy territory, and he's trying to ride a circle around the Union Army just to have his name appear in newspapers and stuff. I mean, there's not, like, Lee never told him to go ride a circle around the army. It's just to say you did it or to show you could do it, And he gets caught on the other side, and so he walks into Gettysburg, and it was just like they weren't planning to do that. They didn't know where the enemy was. They just walked in kind of blind and stumbled their way into this battle because their cavalry, their eyes, was trying to do a show-off ride around the enemy. Yeah, so that's I guess, a little side note about Stuart, his role. And he pretty good cavalry commander, really, but he was trying to do that. Made a pretty big stumble there. So, but yeah, so Custer, he fights in the East Cavalry Field 4 miles east of Gettysburg. It's kind of a place that's not, it's not some place people visit as much as the main area, obviously. I mean, the battlefield's only so large around Gettysburg, and bigger fight over there nonetheless. So Stuart, this is day 3 of the battle. Stuart's trying to protect the flank of their army, but he wanted to not just protect the flank. So like I said, he's a guy who's not going to do just whatever he's told to do. He was trying to ride a circle around earlier. Eventually he comes back, and he's trying to his orders are just to protect the flank of the Army of Northern Virginia, but he's trying to attack. This is Stuart, trying to attack the flank or rear of the U.S. We ended up in this big cavalry engagement, and this is right around the time of Pickett's Charge, which you may have heard of on the last day of the battle, which was kind of the last gasp. So Stuart's charging around the same time as 4 miles east as Pickett's doing his charge on kind of the main battlefield. Cavalry commander of the United States, a guy by the name of Gregg, he was ordered a mounted countercharge from the 7th Michigan, which was Custer's boys. He got out, said, "Come on, Wolverines." They went out and then repelled them. And then the Confederates with Stuart, they gave kind of one last gasp with the cavalry charge with 2,000 horsemen under Wade Hampton. And so the 1st Michigan was sent out, again led by Custer, to repel the charge, which he did again. So, and up to this point, this is like not just the whole army. I told you the whole army hadn't won a war in that Eastern theater, but the United States cavalry has been getting embarrassed by Stuart and these Confederate cavalry for 2 years. I mean, this is not the first time he's tried to ride around the Union Army. He's done that before. So they've been getting, kind of destroyed a little bit. So for Custer to then go in and repel those 2 attacks and finally give them something they can hang their hat on was kind of a big deal for him. He does that, but he also gets more notoriety because he's flashy and he's leading from the front and he's wearing those clothes, and people say, look at Custer, So that just continues to bolster his reputation.
So all the way through the end of the Civil War, Custer continues to follow up on this reputation he's built as being this aggressive and bold leader, and he actually ended up being the one to receive the first flag of truce from the Confederates.
So then there's a couple more years of the war. He continues to gain that reputation for being the aggressor. He fought in the Overland Campaign, 1864, the Battle of Yellow Tavern, and one of his guys actually shot and killed Stuart from earlier. He was in the Valley Campaign, which, if you remember us talking about that was Phil Sheridan in the Shenandoah Valley, kind of doing the scorched earth precursor to what Sherman would do later down in Georgia. Jubal Early was a Confederate. He was moving through the valley towards Washington, D.C., kind of just another almost a last gasp sort of thing. This is towards the end of the war. And again, the Wolverines were sent out to stop him, and they basically just demolished Early's guys. Lee, this is the very, very end. Lee's retreating back towards the Appomattox courthouse, and Custer would go around and block Lee's final retreat. And he was the guy who would receive the first flag of truce from the Confederates. So he got the first battle flag, and then he got the first flag of truce at the end. He rides into the Confederate lines after the truce flag, and he tells Longstreet, who's kind of Lee's right-hand man, he's the number 2 guy, and he tells Longstreet, in the name of General Sheridan, he demands the unconditional surrender of the army. And of course, he was in no position to do that, I don't think. And Longstreet was in no position to accept it either. So it's just more kind of him doing it just to show off than anything. But and when he did that, Lee was already off to negotiate the surrender at the Appomattox courthouse anyways. Custer would actually be at the courthouse for the surrender. Phil Sheridan, the table that they signed the surrender on, Grant and Lee, Phil Sheridan bought the table and gave it to Custer to give to his wife as a gift.
Okay. That was one of the surprising facts I read.
Kind of crazy. I think I saw he bought it for $20, which would be worth a hell of a lot more than that now.
On a quick side note, at the end of the war here, there's this kind of weird story about Custer and how he stole this priced racehorse named Don Juan.
On April 25th, so shortly after the war was over, Custer was having his men search for and illegally seize a large prize racehorse named Don Juan near Clarksville, Virginia, worth an estimate $10,000 in that time period money, so several $100,000 today. So Custer rode Don Juan into the Grand Review Victory Parade in D.C., and then creating a sensation when the scared thoroughbred bolted.
Whoa.
So the owner of the horse wrote to Grant and kind of told them, and Grant told Custer to return the horse to the guy, but he never did. Instead, he hid the horse and won a race with it the next year before the horse suddenly died. So
now let's switch back to take a look at Crazy Horse out west at this time.
So while that was happening back east, Crazy Horse out west, his reputation's growing. They're fighting Eastern advancement from the United States. It kind of dried up for 4 years. They had another engagement that they were busy with that I was just talking about.
Sure.
But they were still fighting these other Indian tribes. Kind of their traditional enemies were the Crow, Shoshone, Pawnee, Blackfoot, and Arikara. The first person he ever killed was this Shoshone raider who killed the Lakota woman washing buffalo meat in the river. He fought a couple engagements against the U.S. military, the Battle of Platte Bridge, the Battle of Red Buttes. In 1865, he was named the Shirt Wearer, which was the war leader of the tribe. December 21st, this is 1866. Like I said, there's very little known about Crazy Horse, so there's not as much to go off of. Custer, those guys documented every little thing that they ever did. Plains tribes, not so much. But have you heard of the Fetterman Massacre?
Yeah, just
Yes, I have heard of the Fetterman Massacre. I'm glad you asked. So this massacre, as it was called from the United States point of view, was the largest military disaster against the Plains tribes up to that point. And it was really just a case of a guy going against orders and taking the bait of some Native American raiding parties.
A guy named Carrington was at Fort Kearny, and he was in Crow territory, which the Lakota, I'm falling apart here. He was in Crow territory, which the Lakota respected for a while, but then it got to a point where the Buffalo tribe had all kind of congregated on the Crow territory, and the Buffalo was like down to one smallish little herd that was all kind of there. So then the Lakota was kind of fair game, I guess. At that point, they went on the different reservation in search of their food, basically. So while they were at the fort, this is Carrington, they had a number of attacks by these kind of various little Indian raiding parties. And Fetterman, he's a guy who, a lot of these guys at this point in time, 66 is like a year after the war. So their military experience is fighting for 4 years against the Confederates, they haven't been out fighting the Plains tribes, and they fought a very different manner of battle. But Carrington's at the fort, and the Indian raiding parties are just kind of attacking. Like, someone will go out and chop a tree down or whatever, and then, to get wood for the fort, and then a couple Indians, just causing trouble, basically.
Okay.
And so they send in Fetterman, who's a Civil War guy, to reinforce Carrington. And Carrington has been pretty kind of hands-off or passive about it. And Fetterman is of the mind, like, we need to do something about this, or they're going to continue to be this thorn in our side. And Fetterman, again, almost no real fighting experience against Native Americans at all. But he allegedly boasted, he said, give me 80 men, and that number 80 will be important, and I can ride through the entire Sioux Nation. General Crook, he was kind of the guy ahead of Carrington, he gives Carrington the go-ahead. He says, you know what, you can take the offensive if you want. And Jim Bridger, who you're just talking about, kind of laid it out succinctly. He just said, these guys, these soldiers, they don't know anything about fighting Indians. So he's kind of there shaking his head, because he wasn't, he'd been dealing with this for his whole life, basically. So he kind of saw what was going on. So on December 21st, Carrington, he sends out a wagon train. It gets attacked, and he orders a guy named Powell to go out and relieve them. But Fetterman says, let me go instead, which he did. According to Carrington, this is like somewhat he said, she said, I think, but Carrington said, I ordered him specifically not to go over the ridge. Under no circumstances was he to pursue over the ridge, that is the Lodge Trail Ridge. But he goes out and after this, the little raiding party, and Crazy Horse and a couple other Indians are out kind of mocking them, mooning them, I saw, and just kind of like taunting them, like, come on, come over the ridge. Yeah. Come over the ridge.
Don't go over the ridge.
Yeah, so Carrington says, well, I said specifically don't go over the ridge, and they're out mooning them, and so then they ride over the ridge. I've heard too that Crazy Horse had acted like his horse was, like, he got off his horse and was messing with it, like his horse wouldn't move, or just kind of do it, just messing around, basically.
Yeah.
And so instead of going over, the wagon train is kind of in a different direction. Instead of going to help out the wagon train, Fetterman is going to go follow the bait, basically, which was Crazy Horse and these other guys. And he rides right over the top of the ridge he was supposed to not go over. And him and all of his 81 men were killed in an ambush right over the top of the ridge. They had a bunch of people were kind of hidden underneath the plains grass up there, and right as they got over the ridge, they just let it all rip. So killed all 81 of his guys that he could have rode through the whole Sioux Nation with, which was at the time the largest military disaster against the Plains tribes. Yeah, the funny thing, they call it the Fetterman Massacre. Of course, that's what the newspapers
Yeah.
back east would have called it. It was like, oh, the
How
horror.
could this happen?
The Sioux called it the Battle of the 100 in the Hand. They had one of their, maybe not a medicine man, one of their like visionary type of guys. I guess I don't know all the specific names for them, but someone had a vision of like 100 dead army men or something before the war, and so they called it the Battle of the 100 in the Hand, even though it was only 80 guys.
Around this time, Crazy Horse would actually run into some trouble amongst his own tribe on account of his having an affair with a married woman.
So Crazy Horse would go on to get stripped of a shirtwear title after sleeping with a married woman named Black Buffalo Woman, who was married to a guy by the name of No Water at the time. And they were sharing a teepee. No Water comes in and tried to kill him in the teepee. Actually shot him in the nose. It became a whole big scandal. And he lost his title over that.
So Custer's going to head out west, and he has a lot of encounters with the Native Americans in the years leading up to the most famous battle, the Battle of Little Bighorn.
But yeah, so around that time, July 28th, 1866, Custer is appointed lieutenant colonel of the newly formed 7th Cavalry out in Fort Riley, Kansas. Had a couple run-ins with the Cheyenne there. At one point, he went AWOL and was arrested. He left to see his wife. So, two passionate lovers, evidently, him and Custer and Crazy Horse. So he was placed on a year suspension, but Sheridan, they had a big winter campaign they were going to go on against the Cheyenne, and Sheridan said, we can't possibly do it without Custer, so they let him back in early. He didn't serve his full suspension. But on November 27th, 1868, he led the 7th Cavalry in an attack on the Cheyenne encampment of Chief Black Kettle, the Battle of Washita River. They reported killing 103 warriors and 53 women and children taken as prisoners. That's Custer's report. The Cheyenne estimated at 11 warriors and 19 women and children. So that's kind of an example of how you get these different, when you're dealing with that, you have entirely different figures somehow. That's kind of the way the Battle of Little Bighorn is. Like there's so many different stories and everything because, we'll get into it, I guess. But at the Battle of the Washita River, he takes like I said, some hostages, and he charges, and the camp kind of disperses. So those are two things that he's kind of picked up on, is if I get hostages, that's a good thing for me, and if I charge, the camp was going to break up and escape. And for the most part, in that sort of fighting, that was kind of the rule, is like the Plains tribes were nomadic, and so they could kind of pack up and leave whenever. They were less prone to take something head on. I mean, they're in no world were they going to be doing a picket's charge.
Right.
Because they could just pick up and leave, and they didn't have the men to do it anyways.
So were they like kind of hiding from the military at this time, or did they not really care? They would just defend themselves if they
they're kind of, they don't want to go into reservation. I'll get into a little bit more of that. But the Cheyenne are for sure, when he's doing that, they're not trying to have any sort of run-ins. I mean, their idea was maybe if we go up to this, because like I said, they killed 80 guys at the Fetterman Massacre, which was the biggest blunder in Plains tribe history. But 80 men, they lost 50,000 men at Gettysburg in 3 days.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago. So the numbers are, but it's just such a different style of fighting, where the Indians thought if we can just harass them and make their life difficult when they're out cutting wood, if we ride in and fling some arrows and shoot at them a couple of times, that's going to make them maybe not want, because they weren't a unified force either. I mean, they're separate different tribes and vastly outnumbered. So that's just kind of their tactics. But this is another quote from Ambrose. He says, of the tens of thousands of men who died in combat in the war, possibly as many as half lost their lives in vain. Lee's charge at Malvern Hill and Gettysburg, Burnside's at Fredericksburg, Grant's at Vicksburg, and many others left the dead strewn everywhere for no discernible military gain. Talking about the Civil War, obviously, there. Yeah. He says, the Sioux would never have followed men who led such bloody, futile assaults But the Americans made heroes out of these generals, and the higher a general's losses, it seemed, the greater the hero he became. I mean, to me, that kind of summarizes what I was saying, that the difference in the mentality of the Sioux and the Plains tribes were just not willing to do that.
Yeah.
And so often when the United States would ride in, they would just pack up and leave. I mean, they weren't going to stand and fight you head on like that, which, again, keep that in mind for when we get to the Battle of Little Bighorn, because they're getting as they're starting to learn what the Plains tribes are all about, they're taking in all this information. Like, when we charge them, they don't stand and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see how that would lead one to assume, like, maybe even though we're greatly outnumbered, when we charge, they're not going to want to stand and fight.
This is how it works. Yeah.
This is how it works out here.
In 1874, Custer's going to lead an expedition into the Black Hills, and he's going to announce the discovery of gold there. And this is really going to be the beginning of the end for the Plains tribes.
So the Battle of the Washita River, that was the kind of the first substantial U.S. victory in the Southern Plains War, and forced a large number of the Southern Cheyenne to a reservation. Well, flash forward a little bit. This is 1873 now, so 5 years later. He was sent up to the Dakota Territory to protect a railroad survey party that the United States had sent in. Let me go back just a bit again. It's kind of getting confusing, I guess. But 1868, the government's going to sign a treaty with the Sioux, and they're going to say, we'll grant you this land, whatever, I don't know the specific boundaries, but it's a specific land is yours for the end of time. Forever. So Custer is going to go up and to this railroad party and kind of protect them from the Sioux, who are, again, making their lives more difficult than they thought it needed to be. He clashes with the Lakota, actually, for the first time in August that year on the Tongue River. One man each was killed, so pretty small little deal. But the next year, 1874, Custer is going to lead an expedition into the Black Hills and announce the discovery of gold on the French Creek, which is near present-day Custer, South Dakota, actually. And once they realize that there's gold there, it changes the thinking entirely.
Yeah, kind of like finding oil somewhere today.
Yeah, exactly.
Destabilizes the region a little bit.
All of a sudden, yeah, boy, you find some oil, and all of a sudden, think you may need to go in and off a liter or two. So, yeah, you find gold back then, and that treaty, we didn't sign that. We never would have known there was gold in that land. Of course, we never would have signed it had we known that. So that's null and void now. So yeah, this triggers the Black Hills Gold Rush. In 1875, Grant says, hey, I remember that treaty, and we'd be willing to just buy that land from you. Let's let bygones be bygones. We'll just, we'll do the right thing, and we'll just buy it from you. And the Sioux said, no. You're not gonna just buy it from us. It's our land. And Grant said, you know what? Then, if you don't want to sell it to us, then you need to report to the reservation immediately. And if you don't, you'll be deemed hostiles, and a threat to the American government. So from Adam and Eve onward, though, the person with the faster shooting bow, the sharper knife, the whatever, they can kind of go do whatever they want. They can conquer as much land as they want. If you've got a better fighting power, that's all you need, really. You don't need anything else. And that was the way it was forever. I mean, even today, to a lesser degree, but there's still some of that.
Did the Sioux take the Black Hills from the Crow, or did they not like each other for some reason?
Yeah, the Crow were enemies. Yeah, so when they're at the Battle of Little Bighorn, that's Crow land that they're there. And so the United States has Crow scouts.
Okay, yeah.
With them. So they were, they didn't like each other.
They had a little rivalry.
Yeah, so even then, and we'll get into it here in just a minute, but that's the largest ever congregation of Plains tribes, because he had not just the Sioux, they had other, the Cheyenne and the Blackfeet were there too. But even then, the United States had Indian scouts. I think it was the Riccara and and the Crow, maybe, but not just all the natives were there fighting.
So now we're at a point where the U.S. military decides to make a plan, the goal being to round up these Plains tribes that are being uncooperative in their eyes, and basically everyone who hasn't already self-reported to a reservation. They're going to make a plan to go try to get them and force them to a reservation.
Grant says you need to report to the reservations by the end of January 1876. And if you don't, you're going to be deemed hostile, which is kind of hard to move around too much up there in the middle of winter anyways. So obviously not all of them went to the reservation. So they planned this three-pronged attack to go get the Sioux that were holding out, who weren't coming in. So Custer, he's going to be at Fort Lincoln in North Dakota, and he's going to be kind of the eastern arm of it and march west. A guy by the name of John Gibbon, he was near Bozeman, Montana, and he was going to march east. And then George Crook, he was down at Fort Fetterman in Wyoming, and he was going to march up north. So they had these three separate prongs, and they were going to leave, or at least Custer was going to leave on April 6th of 1876. And the idea was, like, we're going to meet up and we're going to get these guys to turn into the reservation. But if they were to encounter, because it's hard to, it's a nomadic tribe moving all over, so it's hard to congregate in a single spot. And those guys don't have radio or phones or anything, obviously, so they're communicating either by couriers or telegraph or whatever it was. So the idea was, if one of those three arms runs into a group of tribes, they should be able to handle business in the event that would happen. But so he's set to leave April 6th. March 15th, he got summoned to Washington to testify in this corruption case. So this is something I didn't even know anything about this, but this was very interesting. So Grant is the president at the time. And there's this case involving the Secretary of War, William Belknap, the Trader Post scandal. The way it used to go out on these forts is they would have the soldiers would purchase supplies from private vendors that were known as sutlers. And these sutlers would set up trading posts in the U.S. Army forts, and they were kind of chosen specifically by the officers. In 1870, Belknap got in and changed that. He lobbied to have a law passed that gave the War Department in Washington the ability to choose the sutlers. Then it's given the Washington, D.C. and Belknap the ability to put in their people instead of the officers choosing less local control, basically, if that makes sense. And these sutlers would be providing food, ammo, weapons, things of that nature. Native Americans bought their stuff there too, so it wasn't just the Army. Custer noticed that the cost of goods was getting very high all of a sudden, and at these trading posts back east, they had become very popular investments. Like, you could invest and the price of it goes up and up and up. But the guys who are out there fighting, they're getting a commission, but they still have to buy stuff too. And so he notices that the cost of goods is getting high. The money wasn't going to the sutler. Custer claimed that the sutler at their fort was being paid $2,000 on $15,000 worth of profit. So most of it's going who knows where else. So there's, in his mind, it's kind of a process that's rife for corruption. They assume that the leftover money is going to the investors or Belknap or whoever, but he was also accused of selling the Indians the top-of-the-line breech loaders and repeating rifles. The money that the Native Americans were buying that stuff with came from federal appropriations anyway, so it's kind of to me, that was a little strange. Like, they were giving them money through these appropriations that they were using to buy these top-of-the-line rifles to fight the federal men with. That's like have you seen the meme nowadays where it's missiles going in one direction, it says our tax dollars, and then there's missiles going in the other direction, it says somehow also our tax dollars?
I don't think I've seen that one.
They were also accused of selling the Army defective breech-loading rifles, which would jam after the third round. I saw someone, let me see if I put that in here, some historian thought that may have played a role in at the Battle of Little Bighorn, the fact that they were selling defective rifles to.
Oh.
I think they worked, but they just jammed after the third round. The Native Americans, they did have repeating rifles, and a lot of the United States guys, evidently for whatever reason, still had single shot rifles. From what I was seeing, some of them were still fighting with single shot rifles. So it's kind of a strange. The weapons thing was a little bit strange to me because you thought it'd be you just assumed
Big advantage,
yeah. Anyways, let's see. I'm kind of popping around my notes, so I get lost where I was. But so this becomes a scandal, and Belknap eventually resigns. But that's the background. So Custer's going to D.C. to testify in the House hearing because he claimed that he was kind of a leading critiquer or whatever. I think he leaked something to a newspaper. Somehow they wanted him to come testify anyhow. And at the testimony, he mentions Grant's brother's name, Orville, and says I think he was involved too, which no one had mentioned that before or even accused him. So he, from what it sounds like, hearsay, just kind of it may have been happening, but it wasn't like there wasn't a definitive link when he said it to Orville Grant. And so that's going to upset Grant, obviously, but another thing I was going to say is Stephen Ambrose, that same guy, he speculated that Custer may have been presented with the idea of running as the Democratic candidate for president in 76. So I don't know if he's trying to kind of make a name for himself or what, because Grant was the Republican. And so then when he mentions Grant's brother's name, that upsets him. And so Custer testifies, and then he asked to be released from further testimony because he wants to go back and lead his troops on that big expedition that I was talking about.
So now Custer has to attempt to regain command of his forces out west, but he has the commander-in-chief now against him.
He has Alfred Terry, who's the commander of the Department of the Dakotas, ask for Custer to get his leave. And Grant says, well, why don't you send another guy? Don't send Custer. And Terry protested, and Sherman says to Custer, why don't you go meet with Grant, see if you can settle this like men. And Custer tried to meet with Grant 3 times, and Grant denied his request every time. And so Custer finally, he just gives up and takes a train for Chicago illegally, I guess, because he was supposed to be in D.C. and wasn't granted leave. So Grant orders Phil Sheridan to arrest him when his train gets to Chicago. So then he gets to Chicago and he's arrested and sparked a public outcry against Grant, basically for, arresting one of his top military commanders. And so Grant, at this point, he backs off, and he's facing a little bit of pressure too, because if he sticks to his guns and doesn't let Custer go fight and something bad were to happen, then people could look back and say, well, you didn't let our guy Custer go out there, and that's why you got all these men killed. So he says, yeah, that's fine, but Terry, the guy we were just talking about, not Custer, is going to head the cavalry for this expedition. And so Custer goes off, and he, according to Terry, begged him with tears in his eyes for command, and Terry says, well, I couldn't say no to that. And so Custer gets Terry to telegram Grant, pleading for Custer to lead the group with the endorsement of Sheridan. So they got all these guys, and again, Grant, facing lots of public pressure, complied, but he said he has got to be under Terry's direct supervision. Custer told Terry's chief engineer almost immediately afterwards that he was going to, quote, cut loose, quote, from Terry and operate independently. So he said, I don't need all that.
Got a babysitter.
I don't need a babysitter.
So now Custer's back in command, and they resume their plan to round up these tribes. But as we all know, the old famous Mike Tyson quote goes, if you make a plan, I'm gonna find where you live, hunt you down, and punch you in the face. Hey, by the way, guys, we've run well past my break time. I'm kidding. Pretty tired. It's pretty hot in this recording booth. And also, I'm really not sure why the intern keeps coming in here and taking away my stool. So I'm really not used to standing for this long continuously, I guess is the thing. I think we could take just like a 3-minute break or something. Maybe I could get some water and then We can finish it off.
All we're doing is talking.
Well, yeah, but you guys have the nice chairs out there, and your room isn't cut off from the air conditioner like mine is. And I've been without water for over 4 hours now, and besides, you guys haven't even paid me for the last episode yet.
So that's kind of the background. The tensions are high, and they're setting out for this 3-pronged attack, and any Sioux who hasn't reported to a reservation is a hostile enemy to the government. The plan is they're going to round them up and move them to a reservation now once they find them. On May 17th, Custer and his 7th Cavalry, they set out from Fort Lincoln and head west. Meanwhile, Sitting Bull, he has organized the largest gathering of Plains Indians ever in one place with Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho at Ash Creek, Montana, and they would later move to a place, the Little Bighorn River, this little valley that would become famous. But they were going to meet up and kind of discuss what they were going to do about this encroachment on their land. Like I said, they were in Crow land without the consent of the Crows, so the Crows ended up siding with the United States. So on June 17th, 1876, Crazy Horse, he's going to lead a group of like 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne in this surprise attack against Crook and his force. And Crook had 1,000 cavalry and infantry, and then he also had 300 Crow and Shoshone with him too at called the Battle of the Rosebud. It wasn't really like a huge loss of lives, but Crook was the guy who was supposed to move north of the 3 prongs. So then they fought that delayed Crook, and he never ended up making it to where they were kind of supposed to rendezvous at, I suppose. So the 7th Cavalry, which Custer had, they were a bit of a mess. The 2 guys under him, Reno and Benteen, were kind of the 2. They would be like his, what's the name? Like his right hand and left hand guys, I guess. I don't know what.
Advisors.
Well, yeah.
Assistant to the regional manager.
Assistant to the regional manager. Benteen and Custer hated each other. Custer and Reno didn't get along very good. At that Battle of the Washita, Custer and Benteen were both there. And Benteen wrote some letter to a paper accusing Custer of dereliction of duty for not providing support to a guy by the name of Joel Elliott, who ended up getting killed. And Custer found out that Benteen wrote it, and they hated each other since then. Benteen and Reno didn't like each other, so it was just kind of a mess.
Despite some of the disorganization, they do manage to get 2 of the 3 arms of the attack together.
Terry, Custer, and Gibbon all met up after they found the scouting party had seen a trail of an encampment headed towards that Little Bighorn Valley. So they got 2 of the arms together, and they sent Custer and his cavalry off to move in and see what was going on. The plan was for them to get in, surround the tribes, and then wait on reinforcements to come up. So they set off on a night march on the 24th of June, and they planned to just get reconnaissance on the 25th and then attack on the 26th with the reinforcements. So Custer, their group ends up getting spotted, so they no longer have the element of surprise, and Custer is going to panic a little bit because in his mind he's so worried that they're going to see him and dart, like they're going to get away. Mm-hmm. He becomes blinded by that a little bit, in my opinion. He's so focused on, we got to do whatever we can do to keep these tribes from darting. And people have read into it like, oh, it's because Custer wanted the glory. He didn't want someone else. He didn't want, they darted, and next time it'll be Terry's turn, or next time it'll be Gibbon's turn, or Crook's turn.
Yeah.
He wanted to be the one. And you never know exactly how much of that's true. I mean, he's obviously kind of a glory hound a little bit, so there's probably some of that plays in, but also he's just a bold, aggressive commander. He wants to be on the attack at all times. So it's hard to kind of parse, I think, those 2 different things out. So instead of waiting reinforcements, he plans a surprise attack.
So Custer, as the aggressor that he is going to continue forward with the attack. But it's clear from the It was clear, and I'm losing nifty eyes. I could really use some water. It was clear, but it's clear from the beginning he's vastly in over his head.
He's got 600 men with him. The Indian encampment, you'll find different numbers. I saw anywhere from like 5,000 to 10,000 individuals, and then usually it's like 1,500 to 2,000 warriors, like fighting men. So they're outnumbered. I mean, best case 1,500 to 600, but 2,000 to 600. And they don't, when they spot his scouts are going to see a dust cloud, and they say that's the largest pony herd that we've seen. But they think that they're probably going in. I don't know what they thought, but some people were saying like they thought they were maybe going into a village of 800 people, maybe.
Okay.
And it ends up being possibly 10 times that, 8,000. Like they thought it was maybe just some Sioux tribe.
Crow warned him not to, right?
Yeah. Yes, the Crow said that's the largest pony herd we've ever seen.
What are you doing?
Yeah. So Custer, after hearing that, I guess he's going to divide his group into 4 separate different parties, which is, not something the textbooks would tell you to do regarding warfare. When you have less people, you're not supposed to divide into even further less. Lee did it a number of times in the Civil War, and a lot of it worked out for him. So, I mean, it's part of being aggressive. Like if you do that, then if you're the aggressor, maybe you can force the enemy into some blunders just because you're being aggressive. But it can also work out against you, as we're about to see. And so he has one small battalion stay back with the supply train. That's another error, is they're going to cut themselves off from their supply train. So they just kind of take what they can carry, ammo and everything like that. And Reno and Benteen are going to attack the encampment from the south. That's the plan. And Custer's going to come at them from the north and try to, sandwich them or whatever. That way, again, so they don't, if they attack them just head on, they're afraid that they're going to pull up stakes and head off in the other direction. So he said, well, we got to sandwich them. So he sends Reno and Benteen to the south, and Benteen's not even with Reno. Benteen's off, supposed to be kind of scouting for just like stragglers or whatever. And so he's kind of just lollygagging around. Like I said, I mean, it's been their experience that when they run into these plains tribes that they're going to pull their teepees up and run. So that's just what he's thinking is going to happen. But there's also never been this many warriors in one place before. So he went in without really realizing quite how large the encampment was. There's a lot of different mistakes you can look at. Another thing that he's going to do that proves to be fatal for him is they're not going to have eyes on each other. So Reno and Benteen, when they go south, they can't see Custer because Custer's trying to not be seen. He's on the opposite side of a ridge line, riding around the encampment to get to the north so that they can sandwich them. So those guys have no eyes on Custer. They have absolutely no idea what Custer's doing. And the last thing they saw him do is like waving a hat at him, urging him on, and then they disappeared. That was the last time they saw him alive.
It's worth noting that Custer went into this with no backup plan.
Then you have these 4 tiny parties of guys who are operating independently with, they know, I guess, what their orders are, but there's not like a backup plan. Like, okay, if in the event that they decide to do that, then we're going to this. It's like, we're just going to get in there, we're going to sandwich them, and we take whoever can't run off, So Reno gets down and he has his guys dismount, which when you dismount, it reduces the number of guys you have even further because somebody's got to hold the horses and can't fire. He has like 160 guys with him, and they kind of got it handed to him right away. And Reno allegedly was also drinking at the time, so they saw him drinking from a flask. I mean, you never know, but yeah. For all we know, he was 3 sheets to the wind by the time the day was over. Or he was just maybe had some water in a flask, who knows. They get in, they realize like, whoa, this is way more than we had bargained for. And they start to retreat in kind of a disorderly manner towards the high ground. And apparently Reno, when he issued the order of retreat, he didn't like stick around to help make sure it was a nice organized retreat. He was the first one to start retreating. And they eventually like claw their way up to what's known as Reno's Hill. Reno, he'd already lost like 30 or so men. And at this point in time, he decides to go back down and try to find his aide for some reason. So he's who knows what nothing that he seemed to do really made a lot of sense.
Custer reaches a hill where he can see the sheer size of the village for the first time. And so now he knows for sure he's outnumbered, and he calls back to Benteen for reinforcement.
Right around this time, Custer is going to stop at a place that's known as Weir Point now, and he sees the size of the village and for the first time with his own eyes, and he orders Benteen, who's way back, to come forward. He gave a verbal message, but his assistant cook or someone, he stopped the orderly who's going to give the message and wrote, so this is a written order now, Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, P.S., bring packs, W.W. Cook. So, like, big village, get on your horse and bring the ammo,
Yeah.
Like, pretty clear order, really. Benteen, so he gets this message. He starts moving forward a little bit quicker, but he meets Reno at Reno's Hill and stays there. He doesn't go, and at this point, those guys, like I said, they have no eyes on Custer. They have no idea what's going on. He doesn't go try to see what's happening. So he gets to Reno's Hill and they stop. So Benteen and Reno are just kind of sitting there, and they hear firing downriver to the north, and Weir, who's a friend of Custer's who's there, he requests to Reno he said, let me go forward and see what's going on. And it sounds like a lot of gunfire. And Reno denied the request, which, at this point in the day, they're probably tired. Reno's guys especially had seen some pretty hot fighting, and then it's a pretty long retreat all the way. They had to cross a river and get up this big hill, and they didn't have water with them. And so it's like, we're kind of tired. Also, Reno, like I said, he didn't even really like Custer. So you never know what all his rationale is, or just like, it's a lot of gunfire. I don't, like I don't really want to go down there. It sounds like a lot of people are shooting at each other. So this is like 4 p.m, and they've been moving around and fighting since 9 a.m. It's the middle of June, late June, it's hot. And Weir, he ends up going anyways, and Benteen follows. They make it to the Weir Point, which is where we talked about earlier, and that's when they kind of spotted Custer from a ways off, though. Weir, he wants to go in and help, but someone hands him some field glasses and says, you better take another look. There's a ton of Indians over there, and they're circling around the hill, and allegedly they were shooting down. When they saw them, they were like shooting down,
Whoa.
The Indians were, as if they were they were doing the last little bit of the last stand. Like they saw the very tail end, like they were at the top of the hill shooting down at the guys to finish them off. Okay. So, but I don't know how well they could see. There's a ton of dust and stuff from the horses and smoke from the gun, and long ways off. Who knows? They might have seen like the last few minutes of Custer and his guys' lives. They stay there at Weir Point. That's as far as they make it. And after the Warriors kind of finish Custer off, they head back and push the guys at Weir Point back to Reno Hill, where they would stay until the next day, even on the 26th. And eventually the Army got backups in and drove them off.
So Custer ends up leading this attack, vastly outnumbered, no reinforcements coming to help him. And he's quickly forced to retreat to kind of the only place they could retreat, up this hill. And then there's nowhere to go, and all of his men are slaughtered. And this is what is known as Custer's last stand. When they found Custer's body in the aftermath of this, it was in an unexpected state.
So it's kind of hard to tell the whole thing because there's so many different things happening at the same time. But Reno's getting attacked. Custer's working his way down along this ridge until he gets to a place called Medicine Trail Coulee, which is this drainage that leads down to the river. So he heads down that. At this point in time, when he's headed down the Medicine Trail Coulee, the Warriors are getting on the south side, kind of getting done routing Reno, and they move and they start headed over towards Custer because they realize like their village is being attacked from the other side too. So, and Custer had split his men another time too. He sent Yates off, and Custer went up to the north scouting after like what he thought, what they think. And again, none of Custer's guys survived, so that there's no like official battle reports. No one knows what they were thinking or doing or anything. You have what Reno and Benteen and those guys saw from Weir Point, and you have what the Native Americans recounted. That's what you have to go off of, So there's some uncertainty, but he split again, and Yates' men went off, and they think Custer was going around north even further. So Custer is going to go off after like they think he was trying to get the hostages like he had at the Battle of the Washita. So he ends up going a little bit north. He has Yates' guys go back, and they run into some pretty hot and heavy firing down there, evidently, and they end up retreating back towards the high ground. So they get to, he has Calhoun, a guy named Calhoun, which is his, I think it's his brother-in-law. Oh, yeah, he leaves his brother-in-law Calhoun to like stop at what's now known as Calhoun Hill. It's pretty easy to know what goes on because they're all named after, there's Calhoun Hill, there's Last Stand Hill, there's Reno's Hill, there's Weir's Point.
Named for the losers.
Yeah, all named after the losers. So he has Calhoun stop and try to like provide some sort of resistance and delay the oncoming threat of these warriors while Custer is going to get all the way up to what's now Last Stand Hill, with the thought in mind that once they've achieved the Last Stand Hill, Calhoun and his guys will kind of move back and then they'll defend the high ground position there. But they just got kind of slaughtered, and then eventually they get up and just slaughter them on the Last Stand Hill. And I was kind of looking at a visual of the battlefield, and they have, because they pretty much left them where they laid. I mean, they would do things to the dead bodies and such, but they would go in and they put burial markers kind of where each person was. So you can go in and see, like, this is a spot where they found Calhoun's body. This is where they found this body and this and that. Today, there's like gravestone markers. So there's a bunch on Last Stand Hill, but there's some like scattered along the way. So people are getting, I mean, it's just like a mad dash up to the hill, but they couldn't really retreat anywhere. It's wide open. And I forget, I think they said like 6 or 8 miles or something. So they've been riding these horses all day. This is like late afternoon at this point. And so their horses are tired. The Native Americans have pretty fresh horses. They haven't really been moving around. They're just in an encampment. Their horses have been getting watered by that river. And no matter what they did, they just weren't going to get to any sort of place where they could possibly defend it. So they get to this high ground. It's like, well, this is as good as any, I guess. Yeah, they just got slaughtered from there. And one thing I saw is they said when they found Custer, he had a smile on his face. In the coming days, when they went back to find their dead guys, like he was dead with a smile on his face.
It's a little unclear to what extent Crazy Horse was involved in all these different engagements at Little Bighorn due to just the lack of records. But what is clear is that he was there and played a major role. Crazy
Horse's role in it is a little bit unclear. From what I've seen, kind of what they think is that he was, and you never know again how much it was like, oh, they want him to be, but they thought he probably fought Reno, pushed him back, and then went and fought Custer too. Okay. I've kind of seen that. So, and then I've seen like, oh, he maybe was just with Custer, which I would be kind of more inclined to think they probably would have had the warriors go fight Reno for, like, if he's such a great warrior, they wouldn't probably have him wait on the first, like, Reno came in and we'll just save, like he probably went and fought the first threat and then went and fought the second too. Because some things are saying like he was just with Custer, but he probably, to me, it makes sense that he would be with fighting against both of them. But again, no one really knows. The only provable thing is that he was there and played a big role. Waterman, who is one of the 5 Arapaho warriors who fought, he said Crazy Horse was the bravest man I ever saw. He rode closest to the soldiers yelling to his warriors. All the soldiers were shooting at him, but he was never hit. Little soldier, he's a Sioux. He said the greatest fighter in the whole battle was Crazy Horse. So, I mean, it must have played a big role, but no one knows quite exactly where he was. Just because, I mean, they didn't document their stuff, obviously.
Well, yeah.
To this day, lots of controversy, obviously, about, it's probably the most studied battle that we know the least about, I would say, for sure in America. And people will research and really dig into a lot of the Civil War battles or World War I and World War II, and there's so much information about it. You can kind of track particular guys' movements and troop movements. I mean, down to, it's like a science, some of them,
Yeah.
versus this is, a lot of it is, this account has them going this way. For Custer's retreat, some accounts have them going around the Medicine Trail coulee, this to the north, and some of them have them going the other way. And the oral tradition has this, but the written tradition has this. So it's not a lot of it's known, particularly about Custer's guys, which is the most famous part of the battle. I mean, obviously, it's Custer's last stand is how it was known. So
was it kind of initially Custer was painted more as a hero, or
at first, and I mean, things have changed obviously, but for sure at first it was like, oh, our faithful hero, he died defending whatever to the last man, and he's so brave and gallant and this and that. And his wife Libby did a lot. I kind of went on a campaign afterwards to like paint Custer in good colors, and not a lot was talked about like the tactical blunders that were made. I mean, I was watching, there's a YouTube video of Jocko, Jocko Willink. Yeah, he's breaking down like he said, when we fought in Afghanistan, we had radios, but our missions were planned out so well that we never used radios, because he was saying like, oh, well, Custer, those guys didn't have radios. So, but he said, when we did something, we did it. It was so thoroughly planned out that we weren't anticipating using radios. Like, you may as well not have had them, but we knew what each person was going to do, because Custer didn't have a backup plan. In his mind, he never imagined. I mean, yeah. So some people will say like, and it's again, he's such a kind of an interesting character. It's hard to parse out like how much of it he's just doing it for glory. He's a reckless fool. Like, probably wasn't reckless. I mean, he wasn't gonna. If you would have told him these people are gonna attack back, like, who knows? But he probably wouldn't. You assume he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I think he just fell into the trap of like, this is how it's gone. This is how it'll go today too, and I'll be okay. And we'll like. I don't think that for a second he thought he might lose his life.
Wasn't reckless to that degree. Just kind of headstrong.
Yeah, just bold and aggressive, and that's how he was.
So Little Bighorn was a massive failure from the United States point of view. So there's a lot that can be critiqued with almost everyone involved, and Custer himself made an abundance of errors that people will point to.
People will have a lot of different takes about it, and obviously as people critique, like, oh, he shouldn't have divided his troops, and he shouldn't have. I mean, there's so many. The whole thing is kind of a mistake. You can look at every single decision that was made from about everyone and say, well, that's, that was a big reason why it went wrong. Like, from the beginning, they probably shouldn't have divided their troops. They had assumptions, and when their assumption was proven wrong, there was no way for them to go back and have okay. So if you were going into something, you might say, this is what we think is going to happen, but if in the event that they attack, this is going to be our plan B. There was no plan B. There was no ability to have one. So then when what they thought was they're going to happen didn't happen, then they were just kind of screwed. And they had no eyes on each other. So then those guys have no idea what's going on with Custer. And same thing, Custer with them. So they get the guy to go back, and they cut themselves off from their supply train. They didn't have the ammo that they needed. And he got too hasty. He wasn't waiting on the reinforcements because he's so worried about them slipping away. He got just like in a single-minded focus. So there's so many different points of failure that you could point to and look at and say this is the reason. But like what you were saying is for sure afterwards he was a hero for a long time. I don't know when it changed, but now I feel like now when we think of him, it's more like, well, I don't know. When you voted on it, what were you thinking about Custer?
I really didn't know a whole lot beforehand. Since I've learned a little more, and it seems like people, more think of him as like foolish and arrogant a little bit. Didn't know what he was getting into.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly what the average person thinks about a guy, but I guess to me, I think that the attitude has shifted more along the lines of what you're saying as opposed to he was this brave hero.
Yeah. Well,
but
I think if you went on the street, like 5 out of 100 people would be able to tell you any facts about the guy at all, outside of people who study history a little bit,
For sure. But they would have heard the name.
Oh,
now, how many guys would have heard, had he not died, how many guys would have heard the name George Crook, who was his superior, played a big role. So if he wouldn't have died then and had it be Custer's last stand, I mean, in some ways, I don't know if it benefited his legacy, but Custer is, to me at least, seems like it's probably a household name. Like you may not know much about him, but you've probably heard of George Custer.
Thinking more about it before I looked into it more, I would say it's definitely like hero or positive, connotation with it.
Yeah, well, just the name, Custer's last stand.
Yeah, exactly.
Implies like, oh, he, like this is a hill worth dying on, and yeah. This brave guy is going to sit here and, like, this is my last stand. It rings different than, he attacked a large village that he didn't quite understand or appreciate the size. He didn't know what was going to happen. He was caught by surprise. He retreated to the only ground he could find. There was really no place to go. And then he was slaughtered where he stood. It'd be one thing too, if there was there's a place where we can go dig and trench in or whatever and fight it and kind of defend ourselves. But I'm going to stand here and die, damn it, because you killed all our, like that's a whole separate thing. But that's not even what happened. It's just he got into something that he didn't quite realize what it was, and then he got slaughtered.
Then after the fact, call it the last stand.
The last stand, yeah. So that's kind of like and people too will criticize Reno and Benteen, and these guys have been pretty heavily criticized for not going to help out too. Reno would probably have you would have negative thoughts about Reno if you had heard about this, I guess, in detail at some point in your life. I don't know. Part of that may be just the emphasis that they placed on Custer. I don't know. I mean, I would, like I said, I don't know if I'd want to go down into the valley where I hear all this gunfiring
down there. Yeah.
When they first saw Reno, I guess is maybe different because he was kind of delayed. But when Weir and Benteen got there, they were circling around him on a hill, shooting down, evidently. So it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to ride however long it is over there, and what are you going to do? So yeah, a lot of controversy around it, and this would be the biggest, back east. The outcry over it was huge, and like we got to do something. We can't let this happen again. Is the biggest blunder in fighting Plains tribes, basically, in American history.
What was its importance other than just like the legends that came out of it? Did it have much consequence?
Not really. I mean, because the consequence was it was the last stand really by the Sioux, by the Plains tribes. I mean, they would have to go like the Nez Perce. I don't think they got them in until later, but like they were west of the Sioux. But like the Sioux, the Plains tribe, once they had the Sioux, they were kind of like the last
1,000 bounces.
Great thorn
Good
up
job.
there. I mean, Geronimo was the last Indian to turn his gun into the white man, so they weren't done everywhere. But once the Sioux had capitulated and gotten onto the reservations, then it was more or less kind of a foregone conclusion. So this was like the last stand the other way around.
That's what I was
You
gonna
know,
say.
so then after that, it's just like this cool moment for them.
Like the Bills beating the Chiefs in the regular season.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like a great victory, but it wouldn't last long, sort of thing, because it triggered such an outrage back east that like, oh, we can't let this happen again. And so the consequences of it is it didn't really probably do much to, I don't know that it delayed the inevitable even really. I mean, if Custer could have defeated them there, then yeah, it delayed the inevitable. But I don't think that was, I mean, maybe if they had all those guys, but if, like I said, that they probably would have just retreated. I don't know. I mean, it just finally got down to a point where they realized that they didn't really have an option other than to go in or just be killed, you know. There's a lot of lore to it, and people are very interested by it and study it and visit the battlefield and this and that, but it didn't do much to delay the wheels of history or to change the wheels of history. You know, they kind of went how they went.
The legacy of Crazy Horse following this battle and in its final days shortly after is one marked by just the defiance of the American encroachment, a refusal to comply with this new way of life that his people were being forced into, up to the very end.
After the battle, Sitting Bull, he's going to go up into Canada and kind of hide out there for a spell. Crazy Horse, he says, I'm not going to a reservation, but I'm also not going to Canada.
I don't suppose you'd want to move to Canada.
Canada. No, I don't suppose I would.
Which puts him in a little bit of a tougher spot because
How
now
much postage does it take to send a letter to Canada?
Who's it going to?
Canada. It says, Dear Canada, you.
now they just dealt it to the United States, and so they're upset. You guys can't keep doing this. We're going to increase our attack. All the while that Indian encampment that was so large, Sitting Bull split, and now, you know, so they're getting smaller in number while the onslaught from the east is just getting larger. So 1877, Crazy Horse and a couple other Oglala leaders ended up turning themselves in. They arrived at the Red Cloud Agency near Fort Robinson, Nebraska, lived there for just a bit. And eventually rumors started to swirl that he was ready to flee the reservation. So he got arrested. Once he realized he was being arrested, he drew his knife and he was bayoneted by somebody. No one really knows who. But there's a couple of great names in this, if you're into names at all. Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy was a guy who attended to him after he was bayoneted. He died later that night. Even while dying, he refused to lay on the white man's cot. He wanted to be placed on the floor, on the ground instead. So that's something kind of interesting. He's a stubborn guy, obviously. You know, he's gonna do it his way of life, and that was kind of cool, I thought. And no one knows who killed him either. Like I said, the accounts all differ. It may have been one of the guards. It also Little Big Man, another great name. Wasn't that the name of the bomb?
Little Boy.
Oh, was it Little Boy? No. Little Big Man.
Fat Man and the Fat
Little
Man.
Boy, I think you're right. Little Big Man was a former friend of his who was there and was trying to restrain him when he died. So some people say he might have done it too. So, and no one knows where he's buried either.
What do you think that his legend comes from? Just history as a warrior? Or?
History as a warrior, but then also just some of that stuff like refusing to, well, like, I mean, Sitting Bull is pretty famous too, obviously.
Yeah.
When you think of like famous Native Americans, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Geronimo. I mean, there's just a few.
Geronimo.
So, you know, I guess if you earn a reputation by fighting, and he was at a lot of big fights. I mean, he was a leading role in, when you look at up north in particular, like I said, kind of the rule of thumb was they're going to scatter in the Comanches down south in Texas. That was a little bit different, and so they have kind of their own stuff. But the up north, the two largest victories that they had, the Battle of the Greasy Grass, which is the Battle of the Little Bighorn, is what they call it, and the Battle of the 100 in the Hand, or the Fetterman Massacre. And he played evidently an intricate role, or a vital role in both of them. He refused to leave. He said, I'm not leaving. I'm from here. I'm from this land. I'm not leaving. I'm not going into Canada. And he only turned himself in when is like he kind of died doing what he did, but he wasn't just someone who was killed in battle either. When he found out he was going to get arrested, he said, I'm not getting arrested. He was then killed. And then even as he was dying, he said, I'm not even going to lay on your bed, and you're not going to take a photo of me. So I think that's where some of the fame comes from. I mean, someone for sure could do a better job of probably explaining why, but to me, that's what made me want to look into him, because some of the people, they maybe went in, like Geronimo, he went into the reservations and then he started doing these shows for people. He almost became a caricature of himself.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And Crazy Horse was himself to the very, very end. And he said, this is the way that I've lived. This is the way that my dad lived. This is the way that my grandpa lived. And I will, if you come and try to take it from me, I will fight you. And I'm not going to do it any other way. And there's something kind of noble and cool about that. I don't know. To me, I guess that'd be and it's a great name, Crazy Horse,
Oh, yeah. Catchy. Good branding.
It's a great name. That would be, even though very, very little is known about him, what we consider known, there's a lot of traditions that the Sioux would have had. They get passed down a little bit differently. So the reputation that he might have had amongst the Sioux, even though we don't know very much about it, is different too, probably. Ian Fraser, in the book The Great Plains, he wrote about Crazy Horse. He said, even the most basic outline of his life shows how great he was, because he remained himself from the moment of his birth to the moment he died. Because though he may have surrendered, he was never defeated in battle. Because although he was killed, even the army admitted he was never captured. His dislike of the oncoming civilization was prophetic. Unlike many people all over the world, when he met white men, he was not diminished by the encounter. That's all I have.
Try my best to slow it. I see fire.